In a packed hall in Addis Ababa, as world leaders squirmed in their seats and cameras rolled, President Ibrahim Traoré looked up, held a weathered piece of paper, and said, "The chains you ignore today will choke your children tomorrow." It was a direct quote from Nigerian activist Nnamdi Kanu. Gasps, then chaos. Within minutes, Nigerian President Bola Tinubu stormed out of the summit. But what no one knew was that Traoré wasn't quoting from memory. He was holding a letter that had never been meant for public eyes. Who gave it to him, and why now? The air in Addis Ababa was heavy, even though the skies were clear. Presidents, ministers, and soldiers in sharp uniforms lined the red carpet of the African Union summit. Cameras flashed, smiles were fake, whispers moved faster than the wind. President Tinubu stepped off his jet with tight lips and stiff shoulders. His aides flanked him closely, pretending things were fine. But back home in Nigeria, things were cracking. In Lagos, students had started gathering again, holding signs that read, #EndSARSLivesOn. Videos from Port Harcourt showed youth lighting candles at midnight. Southern Nigeria was restless, and Tinubu knew it. Inside the marble halls of the AU building, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso moved quietly through the crowd. No fanfare, no bodyguards and sunglasses, just him and a small envelope tucked under his military jacket. The name written on it in thick black ink, K-A-N-U. Traoré's eyes scanned the hall. His steps were calm, but his mind was a battlefield. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, smuggled from a prison cell in Nigeria. Traoré hadn't told his own cabinet what it said, not yet. He was waiting for this moment. As the summit bell rang and the doors closed behind the leaders, Tinubu glanced at Traoré across the table. For a split second, their eyes locked. Neither man blinked. In that silence, Africa held its breath. Because everyone knew, when a leader walks in carrying the name of a silenced man, something dangerous is about to begin. It was late at night in Ouagadougou. The stars above the capital of Burkina Faso were quiet. But inside the heavily guarded military compound, something dangerous was moving. President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in a small briefing room lit by a single lamp. The door opened softly. A young soldier entered, pale and nervous. He carried a plain brown envelope. No stamps, no seals. Just a folded note inside, wrapped in plastic and tied with red thread. The name written in careful script. To President Traoré, from Nnamdi Kanu. Traoré took it without saying a word. He waited until the door shut behind him. Then he slowly opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten on prison paper. Kanu's handwriting was sharp, full of strength, even in chains. The letter didn't ask for help, it warned. It spoke of secret meetings held within ECOWAS, the West African Leaders Group. It named officials who had accepted foreign money. It claimed a plot was in motion, not just against Burkina Faso, but against any African nation that dared to stand on its own. There are enemies within, the letter said. Not all chains are made of iron. Some come in envelopes marked aid. Traoré read the letter twice. Then he folded it and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket. He didn't call his generals. He didn't alert the media. He simply walked to his desk, looked out the window at the dark streets of Ouagadougou, and whispered to himself, "If this is true, the continent must hear it." 3 weeks later, he would speak those words aloud, but tonight it was still a secret, a whisper between two men who refused to be quiet. Inside a high-security wing of the AU headquarters, far from the cameras and reporters, President Tinubu sat at a long glass table. Around him were top Nigerian officials, a few AU security agents, and 2 French diplomats who pretended they weren't listening, but they were. In the corner, a man in a dark suit with no name tag sat quietly. No one said CIA, but everyone knew. Tinubu's voice was low and sharp. Traoré must not speak about Kanu, not here, not now. One AU agent looked uneasy. "He hasn't shared his speech with us, sir. He's guarded, too guarded." The French diplomat leaned forward. "If he makes this about rebellion, if he spreads Kanu's message, you won't just lose the South, you'll lose the youth." The unnamed man from the corner finally spoke. "We can't stop him from speaking, but we can discredit him, leak something, tie him to unrest, paint him as extreme." Tinubu tapped his fingers on the table. He hated how calm Traoré always looked, and he hated that a prisoner locked away in solitary confinement could still cause this much fear. "What if he holds up a letter?" one of Tinubu's advisors asked. Everyone fell silent. The CIA officer said, "Then we make the letter disappear, or we make sure no one believes it." Tinubu stood up. "If Traoré says that name, Kanu, we shut him down, diplomatically, publicly, whatever it takes." Outside, the sun was rising over Addis Ababa, but inside that room, the shadows were growing. They weren't preparing for peace. They were preparing to bury a voice, again. The hallways of the African Union headquarters were filled with laughter, flashing cameras, and the sound of polished shoes echoing on marble floors. It was the official start of the summit. One by one, presidents and prime ministers lined up for photos in front of the AU flag, shaking hands like old friends, even if they weren't. Then came the Nigerian delegation. They walked in fast, tight, and serious. But something was off. Behind Tinubu stood more men than usual, dressed in black suits and wearing earpieces. They didn't smile, they didn't speak. They weren't diplomats, they were watchers and silencers. President Ibrahim Traoré noticed them immediately. He stood near the entrance, wearing his olive green uniform, boots polished but dusty at the soles, like he had walked straight from the battlefield. His coat was zipped halfway, and inside it, resting against his chest, was the folded letter from Nnamdi Kanu. As Tinubu passed by, Traoré extended a hand. Tinubu shook it, but his eyes narrowed, like he was looking for a threat. "You look tired, Mr. President," Traoré said flatly. Tinubu gave a tight smile. "Late nights, busy country." Traoré didn't smile back. "So is mine." Photographers clicked away, catching the moment, but missing the tension. To them, it was just another handshake. To those who knew better, it was the calm before a storm. Inside the hall, speeches would soon begin. Official topics, security, trade, cooperation. But Traoré didn't come for that. His fingers touched the edge of the letter hidden inside his coat. He knew once he opened his mouth, nothing would be the same again. He just didn't know who would try to stop him first. The room was silent as President Ibrahim Traoré stepped up to the microphone. Dozens of African leaders sat before him, their faces calm, their hands folded. Behind them, journalists watched closely. Everyone expected a short speech about unity and development, but Traoré had other plans. He began slowly, speaking about Africa's future, youth unemployment, and the need for independence from foreign control. The usual words. But then he stopped mid-sentence and reached into his coat. From inside, he pulled out a folded paper, the letter. Carefully he opened it. The room leaned in. "I was handed a message," he said, from a man whose voice was taken but not silenced. Some leaders shifted in their seats. Traoré looked up. His voice was steady. He wrote, "To speak is not rebellion. To remain silent in chains is." Gasps echoed. Some turned toward Tinubu. Tinubu's face froze. His lips twitched, his eyes wide. He had not expected this. Not here, not this openly. One of his aides whispered something, but Tinubu didn't move. He couldn't. On the other side of the room, the South African delegates began clapping, slowly at first, then louder. A few heads of state joined in, but others, especially the ECOWAS members, looked panicked, pale, unsure whether to clap or walk out. Traoré closed the letter and stepped back from the mic. "No African should be buried for telling the truth," he said. The cameras caught everything. In that moment, the summit changed. It was no longer just about policies and programs. It was about truth and fear. And as the clapping grew louder, one question filled the air like thunder. Who would dare try to silence him now? The moment Traoré stepped down from the podium, the room was already buzzing. Whispers, camera clicks, and tight-lipped murmurs filled the hall. But it was President Tinubu who exploded first. He stood up fast, knocking over his chair with a loud bang. His voice cut through the room like a whip. "This is not leadership. It's incitement. He's spreading the words of a criminal, of a terrorist." He slammed his fist on the table, shaking glasses and papers. The African Union will not become a stage for rebellion. Then, without waiting for a reply, Tinubu stormed out, his black-suited guards rushing after him. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras chased him down the hallway. But he didn't stop. Back in Nigeria, the news traveled faster than lightning. By nightfall, in the streets of Lagos, hundreds of students gathered silently in front of the university gates.